So it's been described as Europe's forgotten war. More than 800 people were killed in this conflict between Georgia and Russia, images of which are still haunting and being shared as the top of articles today. People seeing these images and remembering what many people say has become a war, a conflict that's fallen out of discussion in Europe, that people aren't talking about it. Well, Russia still occupies roughly 20% of territory formerly that was under the control of Georgia. And let's just put that in perspective for you. This user here on Twitter, he's put together a lot of maps, including this one here, which shows you the Abkhazia and the South Ossetia regions, the breakaway regions which Russia now occupies. Now, these two regions here, as you can see, 20% of Georgia's mass. Now, just to give you a sense of what that means for a country, if 20% of the United Kingdom was occupied, this is what it would look like. You can see here in this mock-up map, it would include London and much of the southeast, and as well as the northeast as well. So a mock-up of what it means, and you can see perhaps when it's put in perspective of another country, how destabilising this is for a country to have 20% of your territory occupied. Well, somebody who's been looking at this is NBC's senior reporter Alexander Smith, who has been to the capital of effectively the de facto South Ossetia region on that border there. And Alexander's joining us now. Thank you for joining us, Alex. Just very quickly, 10 years on, what does this mean for civilians living in that region now between Georgia and South Ossetia?
Well, regardless of your political views on this, the effect on the local population is pretty devastating, really. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that hardly anyone in the world recognizes this border. It's only Russia, Syria, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and the tiny Pacific island of Nauru. And the result of that is that no one really knows locally where the border is. The Russian troops and their local Ossetian allies keep on moving it effectively and installing barbed wire in other places. Now, this has obvious geopolitical ramifications, as you've said. It's described as the forgotten war, and it's something which NATO remarks about frequently. But the effect on the local population is undeniable in that they can't visit their relatives who are on the other side of the border. They can't visit graveyards, which they've been cut off from, and they can't plough their land. Now, if you put yourselves in the shoes of a Georgian farmer living on the border, if your cow wanders across the boundary, you can't go and get it back because you'll get arrested. So this obviously has a deep and really very painful ongoing local effect, regardless of what your politics are.
So, Alexander, you've been there on the ground, you've seen it. I mean, are you describing a situation that you saw where there is effectively a militarised border, that there are forces on both sides facing off against each other? I mean, what is the reality for people living there?
I wouldn't say they're facing off, but there's certainly militarisation on either side of the border. The Russian forces have built 19 military bases in South Ossetia. They're very visible. When we were there at the border, a truck drove to the top of a hill on the other side of the valley, very obviously checking out what we were doing there. And on the Georgian side, there are Georgian border guards who are armed. They're in pillboxes on the side of the road. So the presence is very clearly there. Now, the reason I say it's not necessarily a face-off is because everyone is clearly very worried about what might happen if there is some sort of military standoff at the border again. It was only 10 years ago where there was a war there. It was only 6 days long, but it was very bloody, very brief. And the reality is that if Georgia rather tries really to do anything about it, everyone's really worried that another war might pick up again. Yeah.
Alexander Smith from NBC, thank you very much. We're going to leave that one there. Well, obviously, 10 years on, it's still, as we're hearing that, a very contentious issue. Been described as Europe's forgotten war, but clearly you can read the full story on the Euronews website to get an insight into what things are actually like on the ground.